Welcome back to Blurred Summits. Today we are joined by the authors of Quit Like a Millionaire, Kristy Shen and Bryce Leung. I appreciate you both coming on today.
No problem.
So,
Thanks for having us.
For those who might not know who you are, would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourselves and kind of what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So we used to live in Toronto, which is one of the most expensive cities in Canada for real estate. And so back then we were kind of going along our merry way, going through the regular path in life, which is having that stressful job, working many hours, trying to buy a house, and then working for the company and trying to retire at 65, just to be like everyone else. What I found out was that my work was getting not just so stressful, but they were starting to outsource our jobs, and people were really worried, and they were putting in even more hours than they already had, and everybody was basically competing to see who could take the least number of vacations and get the most number of blood clots, which, it's not exactly the best way to live your life. And I basically had a wake-up call when I saw one of my coworkers collapse from overwork and almost die at his desk. And then the doctors were saying that the amount of work that he was putting in was similar to smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, despite the fact that he's never smoked a cigarette in his entire life.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And then what's even more crazy than that was that we thought that he was going to reevaluate his life and then, prioritize his health and prioritize his family. But what ended up happening was that 1 week after that whole collapse, he went back to work as if nothing had happened, and then continued going on his way, paying off the mortgage, and then working crazy hours again. So that was my wake up call. And plus the fact that the housing prices just kept going up and becoming so unaffordable that I knew that this traditional path that we've been told is the only way to really live and the only path to success is not actually going to work for us anymore. Times have changed. Jobs are no longer stable like they used to be, and you can't rely on your job. So that's why we decided, instead of buying a house, to build a portfolio and learn how to invest. And as a result of that, we were able to retire at the ages of 31 and 32. And we've been retired for the last 6 years and traveling the world. So basically, not following the herd has completely transformed our lives. And as a result, we started a blog to tell people how to actually do this so that they don't have to be constantly working and paying off a mortgage and not knowing where their life was going, not knowing whether their job was going to be stable. And the blog took off enough that a editor from Penguin contacted us to write a book. And now the book is published from 2 years ago, and it's called Quit Like a Millionaire. So this whole journey, that basically I was not expecting any of this to happen. I never thought in a million years that we would be able to not only travel for the last 5 to 6 years and actually spend less money than we spent in Toronto, but actually have a huge improvement with our mental health and with our
Oh, sorry, it cut out there. So at what age did you kind of realize that this path was for you, the early retirement, and start to travel?
Probably in 2015. I mean, we had started, we had gotten out of, we had left work and started as we started doing, we were trying to save up to buy a house and save up to buy a house. But every time we did that, the housing prices just seemed to just run away and just seemed to be increasing faster than we could save up. And this was 2 engineering salaries. So we were feeling that the game seemed kind of rigged and just didn't seem like this was a good idea. And around 2015, 2012, I believe, is when we discovered the FIRE movement. So the FIRE movement back then, it wasn't a movement like it is now. FIRE standing for Financial Independence, Retire Early. Back then, it was really just like a handful of bloggers, like Mr. Money Mustache, JL Collins, and maybe Jacob Lundfisker. So those were basically the 3 names in that space. And even then, it was a pretty fringe, not even a movement, it's just like some isolated blogs. And we realized that if we did if instead of putting our money into real estate, which is what the rest of our peers were doing and the rest of our colleagues were doing, if we money, invested it, and then turned it into a passive income meaning something that pays you even without you having to work, that we could potentially either, put all of our money into a house and then try to pay it off over the next 25 years. Or at the time, if I ran the math, I realized that if I started putting the money that we had saved already towards a down payment towards this new goal instead, we could potentially hit $1 million and be done in 3 years instead of 25. So at that point, that was kind of like our fork in the road moment, and it really was a no-brainer. I was like, okay, I'd rather retire 3 years than spend the next 25 years struggling to pay off a mortgage for a house I don't even want.
Oh yeah, for sure. So would you say that this kind of path is for everyone, or do you have to be a certain type of person to retire early? And
I think it's for, like, there's this criticism that it's only for privileged people or people with like high salaries. And a lot of the people in the fire space do have high salaries, but not everybody. I mean, like, there are school teachers in this space, there are registered nurses in this space. There's lots of different types of careers that are in this space that have successfully managed to retire. The key insight towards in financial independence is it doesn't matter how much you earn. It matters how much as a percentage of that income that you save. So if you earn $1 million a year and then you spend $1 million a year, you're no further ahead than somebody who earns like minimum wage and spends it all. It really is the proportion of how much you earn that you can actually put away and then turn into a passive income. That is the key kind of metric that predicts whether you're going to be successful in this fire path or not. So if you earn less, that's fine. But the people that are able to still do it are able to, live in outside of major cities, or live off of the grid, or do these other things to bring their costs down even more, and then they're still able to do it. So it's surprisingly, it really is a lot more accessible than people thought, and it's not just for like people with high salaries and just like privileged people.
Yeah, what we wrote about in the book is that when you actually look at the math and you actually break down the salary of a plumber, and then you actually put and compare that with how much they're actually paying to go to school, compared to someone who is a doctor or a lawyer who actually spends almost 10 years in school, has to get multiple degrees, the return on investment is actually better for a plumber, and you can actually get to FI a lot faster. And we have had people write into us reader cases that when you actually calculate their what we like to call the pot score, pay over tuition, it's actually better than an engineer, and they're actually able to get to FI faster than it took us. So it's not just, you have to have a STEM degree in order to become financially independent. You have to make 6 figures. There are many people striving for fire that are not in that category at all, and people who have made it who are also not in that category. And I think and the thing is, people get really caught up on this like FI number, like I have to get to this number, and then it's like my annual salary times 25, and that means I can safely withdraw 4%, and then that means I'm financially independent. But there's actually many different flavors of fire. Some people don't actually plan to ever stop working. They actually really enjoy their jobs. It's just maybe they want to go down to part-time because it's just they don't have enough time for other things like family or taking care of their health. So maybe they'll actually do partial fire, in that they'll build a portfolio that's enough to take care of half their expenses, and then the other half their expenses will be covered by their part-time job. Or some people are working freelance. They actually, maybe they were an engineer and maybe they wanted to be a writer, and then maybe being a writer is not enough to cover their entire expenses, and it's not really a continuous salary. It's not expected. But if you have a lot of your expenses covered by the portfolio, you can just the additional amount that you don't have, you can use that to cover with your passion projects, with your freelance career. So there's actually many different options. It's not just one, very in the box thinking, which is you have to get to this FI number. And then like, if you can't get to this FI number, then you might as well just give up and never even bother pursuing fire in the first place. It's about having choices, and it's about freedom. So the closer, the fact that you actually just start thinking about your finances and learning how to invest, that will get you to be much, much further than everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's super awesome that it's like, even no matter what your salary is, people can actually get to that financial independence, which everyone values so highly. Mm-hmm. And I think people don't realize how close they can get to that point, mm-hmm. where it's like, all you have to do is, I guess, be a bit more self-aware of how much you're spending and all that sort of thing, right? But for you guys, do you feel like you're having to cut corners or at least when you were working with saving money, or did it feel like since you had this goal, everything was kind of worth it when you're working towards it?
Well, from the fact that we spent $5,000 to $10,000 a year on vacation and did not feel guilty about it at all. That was the best money I spent. I didn't feel like I was cutting corners at all. I think the thing is, people don't realize that if you get the three biggest category correct, which is housing, food, and transportation, and especially if you live in a big city, yes, housing is very expensive. However, you have the advantage of cutting down significantly on your transportation costs by relying on public transit and relying on car sharing. So for us, we actually never owned a car the entire 10 years that we were working in Toronto and working towards financial independence. We basically just got like an auto share car membership, and it only cost us about $200 a year. So even though housing is really expensive in a big city, there are other options that you can handle in those two other categories. Food, we found out that we were spending way too much money eating out on restaurants when we first graduated. I think at one point we spent $400 a month just on beer from going to bars and just drinking out. Not even the food part, just the beer.
That was my fault.
Yeah. So just like
I mean, good times, right? Why not?
Yeah, it was good times, but
I regret nothing.
we were able to optimize that by like now we discover things like you can actually bottle your own booze, and it's so much cheaper. You're not actually you're paying like a quarter of how much you would have spent if you went to bars or even if you went to the LCBO. So there's a lot of ways. It's not even cutting corners. It's like, I call it like winning at life, and just life hacking to the point where you're getting the same benefit, but you're spending a fraction of the cost, and you're feeling really good about yourself because you're actually optimizing, and it's a game that you can't lose.
And I guess to do that, did it take a bunch of years of experience, or were you able to, from the get-go, realize what corners needed to be cut and to live the same, but a lot cheaper?
I think a big part of it was we didn't let when we started working, we didn't let our costs inflate like other people do. Because a lot of people do this, and I know in the oil patches this is quite common too. Like when they start working, they start buying up all this stuff, right? They have like a condo, they have a house on top of that, then they have a car, then they have like an SUV, then they have another car, and then they have like an all-terrain vehicle and like all this kind of stuff. So we never really did that because we were trying to save up to buy a house. So that was one big part of it. And then when we realized that the house was not a worthwhile thing to be saving money towards, and then we were trying to go towards financial independence and retiring early instead, then that's when we really started trying to like optimize the hell out of everything. Like one example of this is, so we keep looking for wins in which we're not sacrificing, like Kristy mentioned. So one example of this is like our gym membership. So there was a period of time in which we were paying like, $150 a month for the two of us for like to go to the gym.
A Good Life membership.
Yeah, Good Life, like YMCA, that kind of thing. And there was a period of time in which here in Toronto, the TDC was striking for, I don't even remember why, but they were going into like some labor dispute, and they were striking for like the summer. So we decided to just run to work, right? And like every morning, and then we would just shower at work because they had like shower facilities there, and we would just like do that, and it was like 5-7 kilometers each way. It sounded really daunting at the beginning, and it was, but after a while we just got used to waking up earlier, and then we started doing that, and then we realized, hey, we don't need this gym membership at all. So and then when the transit thing came back, we realized we don't really need it for like 3/4 of the year when it's actually nice out. We can just run to work. So this is an example of something in which it was like we managed to not sacrifice on anything. Like we still got to exercise. We still got to enjoy the great outdoors and this kind of stuff for most of the year. But we also saved money on transit, and we saved money on a gym membership that we didn't need anymore. So we started looking for stuff like that to figure out how do we get the same or a better, healthier lifestyle with less without sacrificing, with less cost. So that's kind of what we did there, like looking for life hacks rather than looking for things to sacrifice.
Yeah, I think that one, I guess, taking advantage of opportunities that lots of people would probably view as negatives, right? Like,
yeah,
they think, oh no, now I can't take transit. I'm going to have to Uber or do some rideshare, which is going to be more expensive. But
yeah, a lot of people during that time did like taxis and this kind of stuff. So it caused our costs to go up. Ours went down.
Yeah,
so I think it's decisions like that we consistently make, and you do enough of those things, and over time it stacks up, and then now all of a sudden you're wondering why your cost of living is like half or even less than everyone else's with and why your retirement portfolio is so much bigger than everyone else's. It's decisions like this that stack up over time.
Yeah, I think. Is it because you guys are super self-aware of your money, how it's going, that you were able to realize these things, or is it just how you guys are?
No, it's called poverty and growing up on 44 cents a day. So I was actually born in China. I grew up. I came to Canada when I was 8. So I spent like part of my childhood in China, part of my childhood in Canada. And one of the things that growing up in another country teaches you, especially back then when it was it's like a third world country at the time, is that basically there's perspective when you come to the Western world, in that you really don't need as much as you think you need, because in other countries people can survive on far less than people are used to here. And so growing up with that background, is just like coming to Canada, like a can of Coke blew my mind. Just being able to drink a can of Coke, I was like, this is like the biggest luxury anybody could ever have in my village of 3,000 people from the farm town that I'm from. So like to us, it's just like, now it's like, oh yeah, it's just $1 or whatever it is. But having grown up with that kind of background, and from that scarcity mindset, which is not something that I wanted, but something that was kind of thrust upon me just because I had that no choice. But the reverse of that is that kind of constraint actually causes you to be more creative. So whenever we run into a problem, my first thought is never just throw money at the problem, because growing up I didn't have money to throw at the problem. So you actually have to be more creative and think of other ways that you can turn a negative into a positive. And one of the examples I can use from the pandemic now that's actually quite current is that people struggled with not being able to go to restaurants, not be able to go out, and it's a really horrible time. But one of the very, very few upsides to the pandemic is that people have actually improved their cooking skills, because you couldn't go to a restaurant even if you wanted to. And as a result of that, people had to figure it out. Like, you had to figure out how to cook. You had to go online on YouTube and look up cooking videos. And for us, it's the same thing. Like, we thought we had pretty good cooking skills, but it was actually terrible. It just basically just barely get through it. And now we've actually improved our cooking skills enough that we're not embarrassed to make lunch and dinner and for our friends and for our family. So sometimes necessity breeds creativity. And I definitely credit the perspective that I got from living in another country and growing up in poverty to get that perspective. So now every time we run into a problem, it's never going to be just throw money at it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting how you're able to take kind of, I guess, an unfortunate upbringing, or I'm not sure what you want to call it, but to then use that to create this positives in your life later on, right? Like the saving money and things like that gives you that tacticalness or tactile ability that not many people do. And I guess jumping off of when you brought up COVID, I know in the book you guys talked a lot about traveling and your retirement savings. How much of a factor did COVID have on your, I guess, ability to travel and your portfolio in general?
Oh, tons. When we were first in hearing about COVID, and was just starting to like spread outside of China, and we were in Thailand at the time, and we were just hearing about people from Wuhan that were in the city of where we were in, which is Chiang Mai, and we were like, oh boy, is this is this going to become really bad? And we didn't know at the time how bad it would become, but a month later, Trudeau was telling all Canadians, okay, now it's time to come back home. And because planes are going to start shutting down again. Because planes are going to start shutting down. We were in Indonesia at the time, so we had to kind of scramble and cancel a bunch of plans and get ourselves back to Canada before things started really shutting down. And we were on like the second to last plane that left from Taiwan back to Vancouver. And fortunately, so we just got in right before we would have had to deal with repatriation flights and this kind of stuff. Yeah. And so that was a pretty sudden and a pretty shocking kind of abrupt end to all of our traveling, because at the time we had like 6 months worth of like stuff that we were still going to do, and we've been in Canada ever since. But one of the upsides that we've seen from this is that now that we've been stuck in Canada, we both got our shots. So after we got vaccinated, the borders are still closed, but we can still travel inside Canada. So we were exploring BC. We just returned back from a trip to the Atlantic provinces. Turns out that Canada is actually quite big, and
a lot bigger than we thought.
Actually, really quite beautiful, and Canada is a lot more than just Toronto, which is something that.
What are you talking about? We're the center of the universe.
Which is what people from Toronto tend not to realize.
That's another thing we realize. Everybody who is not from Toronto hates people from Toronto.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of anti-Toronto sentiment across this big country of ours, and I didn't realize how much people hated us, and like, I think it's because we keep talking about Toronto as if it's the best thing ever, and it's not.
Yeah, that might have helped their decision. Yeah, just a little.
So yeah, I'm learning more about my fellow Canadians and this giant, beautiful country that we actually live in. So that's been a nice and eye-opening experience. I had never actually traveled inside Canada. It was always just our home city, and then different countries. So we've been doing domestic travel, and that's been working out great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Again, taking advantage of the opportunities presented with you, right? Limited abilities to travel. Why not do it where you can, which is across the country, which I think lots of people don't actually do that, is travel inside whatever country they are. But
yeah,
kind of being this big, why not?
It's actually a lot more common for the Americans, because there's that great big American road trip that everyone does where they kind of hit all of like 48 states or whatever. Canadians don't really do road trips, like generally. Like it's not really, we tend to like fly to Europe and then like backpack across Europe or the Caribbean rather than explore our own backyard. So it's been a nice opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I guess for Alberta, our road trip is out to Vancouver. We don't really go east at all. So Alberta goes out east or goes out west, and that's pretty much as far as it goes.
That's a pretty sweet road trip to Vancouver.
Yeah,
that's nice.
It's a pretty nice drive. It's only about 12 hours, so it's nothing too crazy, but you can hit through all of, I guess, Kelowna, Vancouver. You can hit the island, and it's nothing crazy compared to what the US does, but it is a pretty decent ride. So nice. I guess
I wouldn't call 12-hour like not too bad, but that sounds pretty punishing to me. But hey, good for you.
He's not a fan of driving.
I
can't drive. I can't drive for that long. I'm not doing it. I'm a plane guy, not a driving guy.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I guess my family's always driven places, so it's more or less what I'm used to. So
we'll take the train next time. We'll take the train.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's too much quicker, but I guess it's not. You won't have to be the one driving the train.
Oh yeah.
So I guess on the note of traveling, what have been kind of your favorite countries and experiences you've been to while you've been about doing that?
Oh God, there's so many. I don't even know where to begin. I guess they're my favorites for different reasons. So Chiang Mai, Thailand is my favorite to live in long term. It's just the people are so nice. The Thais are called it's called the land of 1,000 smiles for a reason. And you just feel very at home, even though you're in a foreign country. And everything people are just more relaxed. It's also because of that Buddhist culture. So they're very much into meditation, into wellness. And then there's also, everything is so ridiculously cheap. It's unbelievable. Like you can get a massage for $10. Every meal is $2 or less. We never had to cook. I think the condo that we rented out didn't even have a kitchen. And we never needed it. And we were able to rent a condo with pool from somewhere around $600 to $800 a month.
Oh, wow.
And that's amazing. Probably, you probably can't even rent like the parking spot for that much in Toronto. No. So I would say Chiang Mai, Thailand is my favorite in terms of places to live long-term and to build a community. We also really like Portugal. Portugal has very interesting diversity of landscapes. So we've been to quite a few places, like the bigger cities like Lisbon or Porto. We've been to Lagos, which is the southern part of Portugal. Totally different. It's very beachy. It's got limestone cliffs, looks completely different. Almost like you feel like you're in a different country from when you explore Lisbon or Porto. And then there's Coimbra, which is like a nice little university town. Then you have that like quaint feeling where you have enough amenities, but then you have that like small town feel with everybody knowing each other. And also very, very good value. Once again, Western Europe is not a place that we were expecting to find value, but Portugal is it. Portugal, the cost of living is way, way lower than most major cities in Canada. And people are really nice. The food is really great. The weather is exceptional. We're basically giant wimps now. Like after leaving Canada for so long, we just can't deal with the cold anymore. So Portugal is fantastic for escaping the winter. And then we also really like Japan because Japan's got that really quirky personality. They've got the most amazing food out of anywhere we've ever been to, especially when we ate Kobe beef, which is the really like luxurious high-end beef that makes every single steak you eat afterwards taste like crap. So, and then sushi, after we ate sushi in Japan, we're like, what have we been eating our whole lives? Like, this is actual sushi. And even the rice, that they pay so much effort, attention and effort to the rice. Like every single grain is perfect, and it has to be like room temperature so that it's not burning the roof of your mouth, and it's like not cold, and it's the perfect like texture as well. They just put 150% effort into everything that they do for the Japanese. And then what other places do we like around the
there's
world?
just so many.
There's a lot.
Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe
like,
was very
Switzerland's
interesting.
beautiful. Like
Yeah.
we've just been like, I think we hit like 40, 50 countries at this point.
Oh,
And
wow.
we would be traveling. We would, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we'd still be traveling, because as we found out after we started traveling is that by time averaging, so you know, she hinted at some of the cities that we really like, the cost of living is way lower than anywhere in Canada. And if you time average the amount of time that you spend in these lower cost cities versus kind of more metropolitan, bigger cities like, you know, London or places in like, you know, like a lot of like Western Europe, like Amsterdam, for example, you can end up like over the course of a year spending less than you would be living in one city back at home. So when we realized that, we realized, hey, we could just travel forever. And we've been basically doing that ever since we retired up until about a year ago. And now we've been kind of stuck in one place. But we still have our bags packed. We still have our eyes watching the borders for when they open up again, because we really want to get back out on the road.
Yeah, I think it's crazy to think that you could travel and somehow have it be cheaper than living at home.
Yeah.
Or at least me personally, I peg it as being so expensive to go travel, and
That's the big secret in the digital nomad community. Like if you go and talk to other travelers and you go to a conference, everybody knows that fact. They're like, oh yeah, that's obvious. Yeah, who doesn't know that? But then you come home and you talk to people and they're like, nobody knows that. Everyone's like, but vacation packages are so expensive.
Yeah, because when you travel, when you're working, you have to travel like, you know, Saturday to Saturday, because you know, people have to take vacation days, and you end up like taking expensive flights. You end up taking packages or going on bus tours or cruises or going to resorts and staying in hotels, which is fine. But when we travel, we don't stay in hotels. We stay in, you know, Airbnbs.
And for long term, not just for like a week at a time.
Yeah, we stay in sublets. We stay in places where people actually, you know, like live, what people actually who live there actually live on. And we cook where appropriate, and then we go out to eat where it's appropriate. But yeah, when you put it all together and you combine it with this fire stuff. So, you know, let me give an example. So after we did this kind of, so in the book, we talk about the different phases of fire. So the phase that most people are focused on is the accumulation phase, where you're trying to hit that FI target. And then when they get that target, they go, yeah, I can retire. There's something that you can do to your portfolio to shift it so that after you are retired, because now you need the income, to change what you're investing in so that it's now paying you dividends, interest, so that, you know, so it's actually paying you the money that you need to live on without having to sell anything. And so we shifted our income when we retired so that we were making between $35,000 and $40,000 in income from the portfolio every year in dividends and interest without having to sell anything. But when we were in Thailand, we were living on 20,000 or 25,000 Canadian dollars a year. So while we were in Thailand, and while we were in these lower cost cities, the portfolio was actually paying us more per day than it cost to live in that city. So we were actually making money every day that we were traveling. And then after we were done with it, we would actually come out with it with more money than when we left. So then when we entered that country. So it's like when you combine all these different strategies and tactics that we discovered over time and we've written into the book, it really becomes a superpower. You just end up finding like your money just grows without you having to do anything. And now we have more money now than when we retired with, which is a pretty amazing feeling. Yeah,
it's hard to believe that you can retire, but yet still accumulate this wealth and live a normal life. But
it still weirds us out, actually. Like it still feels like, okay, it still feels like we're cheating, but yeah, it's true. You know, when people kind of say money makes money, and this is kind of why this happens. If you put all your money into a house, the house ends up costing you money, and then you end up having to keep, repairing the house. You keep feeding it. You keep paying property taxes on it. But when you put it into something like this that instead makes you money, the money flows the other direction. It flows towards you rather than away from you. And then when you realize that and you combine it with travel, it really just becomes like basically infinite money.
I think it's also the community that you're surrounding yourself with. Back when we were working, we were surrounded by engineers, and there was no other field that we really had, like different backgrounds of people that we could access, because you're just working so many hours per day that you have no time to meet new people or kind of get a difference of opinion or anything. It's just everybody's kind of thinking the same thing. And the thing is, once you get out there and you start traveling, and you're FI, you meet people from all different backgrounds, and they make money in all different ways. Like people who do marketing for a living and they're making money online, and their job is completely remote. That's something I didn't think was possible when I was in Toronto. And then people who are like they're nomadic and they actually live in different places, or they split their time during the year in 2 different places when it's cold and when it's hot. That's another thing I didn't realize. I just thought people buy a house and they just stay in one city and it's their forever home and they just live there for the rest of their lives. That's one way of living, but there's many, many other ways of living. But you will never be exposed to other people who have different mindsets and different ways of living if you're stuck in an office and everybody has the exact same life. How are you going to know any differently?
Yeah, I'm really interested over the next couple of years as to what's going to happen to the FIRE movement, because something that I wasn't expecting was the advent of work from home. So, everyone was forced to work from home that could. I mean, if you're a waitress, it's very difficult to work from home. But a lot of other industries that we never thought would embrace teleworking, over
doctors, right?
Doctors were famously difficult to make remote because licensing issues, because you need to physically see your patient, and Now, over this past year, the medical industry has been forced really to reformulate itself around a work from do all your appointments over the phone or over Zoom. And then, do your lab, if you need to take blood, if you need to do anything physical, you go into like a lab and then requisition the form and then have everything socially distanced and all this kind of stuff. So that industry has managed to transform itself and become very work from home friendly. Arts, marketing, all those kinds of
graphic design.
Yeah. So a lot of those jobs have become remote. Engineering was always naturally easy to make remote, like software development, but companies have been, very reluctant to embrace it until now when they were forced to. And what we've discovered is that if you're able to make your job remote, it opens up a ton of opportunities to save lots and lots of money very, very fast. So for example, our field, a lot of people go down to Silicon Valley and they work in Santa Cruz, that kind of San Jose, San Francisco, a lot of those places. Very, very high cost of living, but a very, very high salary. And they would find themselves not really able to, even though they made a lot of money, they find themselves difficult to save a lot of money because everything else costs so much. Now, when all these companies have said, okay, you have to work from home, and it will be interesting to see what happens as we transition back out of the pandemic, because I still think there's going to be a significant number of people who will choose to continue working remotely. They no longer have to live in San Francisco. They can, they can commute. They can go down to, for example, Mexico, and then live in a city like Oaxaca or Puebla or something like that, in which the cost of living is way, way, way lower, but they're still making their California salary. So there's and it's pretty much like the same time zone, or maybe 1 hour off. So you really wouldn't even notice, your employer wouldn't even notice that you're in a different country, but at the same time, your savings rate would have gone from the low 10% up all the way up to 60 or 70%. And all of a sudden you're making really rapid progress towards FIRE. So I'm really curious to see how that is going to change the game, because I think that's one of these unexpected upsides of this whole pandemic. We've all learned that work is not nearly as tied to the location of your employer as we thought it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for a bunch of years, at least for me, it's always I don't know how people could work from home and be as efficient as they were if they were working online, or I guess in person, vice versa. But after, I guess, working a summer job and stuff online, I realized that you can actually do a decent amount of work online and be relatively efficient at it. So yeah, I think as long as business owners can see that they're going to get a relatively similar return on investment with their employers, they'll definitely stick to it.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to own an office building. They don't have to pay rent, all these other things that they can cut cost with.
Yeah. In some circumstances, they might even be able to get more productivity because people are not wasting their time during, in the commute, trying to get to work. That actually shaves off like hours of your day. And then some people can't actually, well, this is like a double-edged sword. So some people can't distinguish between like their work time and their family time. So somehow they all kind of blend in together. And there have been reports that people actually worked more hours during the pandemic if they were allowed to work from home, because they actually just continued working, even though normally it would be time to, leave and go home for the day.
Yeah, at least with me for school, I realized it was way easier to focus, and you could actually be way more productive, get more done, waste less time at home, right? Because, or at least for me, I always found you're hanging out with friends, these things in between classes. But now when you're at home, you don't have time to do that stuff. So you're able to get work done, focus, and get a lot more done. So hopefully things will move in that direction where people can work online and do that, so they can, again, live out somewhere more remote, cheaper, make that good money. But I guess we'll have to see where things go with that and just play it by ear. So when it comes to like saving and I guess planning for retirement, what sort of mistakes do you see either like university students early or people that early graduates seem to make when they get out of school and get that first paychecks?
Student debt is probably the biggest one. This is more American, because when Americans write into us, like I regularly see, I have student debt worth $250,000 because I did a master's degree. And me as a Canadian, I go, yikes, right? Because we just don't have those kinds of crazy numbers. But we still have some student debt here in Canada, but they tend to be in the $30 to $50,000 range rather than $250,000. So getting too much, going into too much debt for a degree that doesn't increase your earning power, that's one big mistake that a lot of people make, especially Americans. And I guess the second one is inflating their lifestyle costs too quickly, because when you're students, everybody is trying to scrimp and save and spend as little money as possible, because back then none of us have any money. But then when you get that first big paycheck and you're like, holy shit, it's like, like X thousands of dollars, there's this temptation to be like, okay, now I'm going to go out and buy a house, and I'm going to go out and buy a car, and I'm going to go out and eat out every day. And so then it's good. And maybe it's fun to do that for like a little bit, but if they make like big decisions, like buying a house, like way too soon, they'll end up like going straight into like debt and then struggling like right off the bat, rather than building any wealth first. So a comfort level with debt is not actually a good thing. Like we've become very, very comfortable with debt and just see it as like a thing that everyone else does. I mean, like I know the financial media says, oh, this is good debt, this is bad debt. But the reality is none of it's good debt. Like all debt is bad. So being way too comfortable and a willingness to get into debt early on, that's probably the biggest mistake that people make right out of like say undergrad.
Yeah. And I would say missing out on stock market returns by not understanding investing. And I think I'm definitely guilty of that, because I was very hesitant about investing for a long time, because again, like the background growing up in poverty, the plus side is, you learn how to optimize things and you learn not to take things for granted. But the downside is that you're terrified of investing. And you're too negative and there's too much of a scarcity mindset. And I think that really holds people back. And especially if you're a university grad, if you're that young, your time in the market is very, very long. You're quite lucky in that you have time on your side. So the earlier you learn how to invest and the earlier you get into index funds, the better it is, because then you actually have a lot of time for your money to make money for you, rather than doing the hard work of, killing yourself at a job and then trying to pay for a mortgage and all that. So if you after you've paid off your student debt, after you have 6 months of emergency funds, just in case you get let go from your job or you're having trouble finding employment, once you get working, the first thing to do is set up your RSP and TFSA, and then understand how to invest and try to get into that as soon as possible. Because the fact that you have youth on your side, that is definitely a luxury. Like a lot of people, they make a lot of financial mistakes and then they don't notice until they're much, much later. Like people write into us when they're 60, and it makes it so much more challenging, because they're like, I'm planning to retire in the next 10 or 20 years. I'm just starting my investing journey, and how's that going to work out? So they say things like, I wish I had known about this book. I wish I had known about financial independence back when I was, just out of university in my 20s and my 30s. I would have had 30 years of growing my portfolio. It would have been 10 times what it is now. I wish I could go back in time and change that. So now it's like that person from the future is now talking to you guys graduating and saying, okay, if you understand investing and you get into it now, you're going to have a huge advantage over other people who wait.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I was pushing it off through the first couple of years of university. And then I guess last year with COVID, I finally had time to do the reading. So I started getting into it a bit. Then now after reading your guys' book, it's definitely made me reconsider it again, thinking of rebalancing my portfolio, being able to plan for that future and realizing that there's options to obviously not have to work for 40 years after I graduate to then do it. So I think it's very interesting, and I guess it's a good perspective to have for individuals where they can have that financial independence from a relatively early age.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, how did you find out about our book anyway?
My friend, he read your book and he was telling me all about the information, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. So then purchased the book online and audio book, and then heard about it.
You did the audio book. So you're used to her voice then.
Yeah. I originally started with the physical book, but then I realized now that when I was commuting to and from work, it was an hour a day. I'm like, might as well use it to listen to something and be a bit more productive with it. So then, just started listening to it that way, and then kind of got all the information. So I think it was very good. And then I guess having the book, I was able to go back and look at kind of the graphs, the charts on there, and start to understand it a bit more.
Yeah,
so,
awesome.
Yeah, still been a bit busy to start applying things, but now hopefully with this little lull between work and school, I'll be able to start applying it and rebalance and kind of set myself up for after I graduate and see where things go.
Yeah,
that's great.
Good. Cool.
Yeah, so I guess one thing that I've always kind of wondered is, are all millionaires made equal? Like, are they all the same, or is there kind of different things that hold them?
There are many different types of millionaires. So in the book, I kind of talk about, like, this is a concept I made up. It's called the FI triangle. And the idea being that, after we've graduated and after we started writing this book, we've, met a lot of people. We've spoken at a lot of conferences and podcasts, and we've met, a lot of millionaires. And there's basically 3 different paths to get there. So the FI triangle, the idea is that there's basically 3 things that matter when it comes to personal finances: income, expenses, and your return on investment. So like your investment knowledge. So you could either make it into become a millionaire by making a ton of money. Like, say you're an entrepreneur and then you start up Snapchat and you sell it for like millions of dollars. That's one way of doing it. The second way is the optimizer way, which is, you make pretty decent money, and you save and you cut your rather than cut, like, control your expenses very, very well, so that you maintain that very, large savings rate where you're making a good amount of money and you're saving most of it. And then the third way of doing there is the investor side, which is these people that, for example, buy up a bunch of real estate, or they actively stock pick, or maybe they, there's
value investing.
There's value. There's some Bitcoin millionaires out there. I don't really think that's a reproducible method of doing it. But there are these 3 basic 3 paths of towards millionaire status. And the interesting thing about it is, based on the path that you take, the personality type is very, very different, right? So we are probably one of the most risk-averse people in the FIRE space, but there are some people who, made it to FIRE, made it to millionaire status by, starting, creating like a tech startup or building their own business and like this kind of stuff. And there are other people that did it by, playing the stock market. And we are, I think that just based off our informal survey and experience of meeting like a lot of these people who made it to $1 million status, is that the optimizer, so the way that we did it, is the most common and the most reproducible, right? And the reason for that is, somebody, we can't all be, Elon Musk, right? Mm-hmm. Elon Musk starts Tesla, started PayPal, started Tesla, made billions of dollars. If you literally copied what he did, it wouldn't work, because PayPal and Tesla already exist. So if you were to go that method, you have to find your own personal way that only makes sense for you, to start the business that makes sense for you, and in order to get it that way. Same thing to do with like the Warren Buffett, picking stocks method. If you were to simply copy people, who pick stocks, it wouldn't work for you because you wouldn't find out about what they're doing until after they've already done it, right? So you have to find your own investment strategy that works for you. But the optimizer way, which is the way that we write about in the book, track your expenses, find these like ways of like getting the same quality of life while reducing your expenses and maintaining a reasonably good salary and maintaining a reasonably good investment strategy that just hits the average. That's the most reproducible way of doing it. And it's also the least risky. So yes, there are definitely different types of millionaires. I would argue that the path that we took and the way that we espouse on the book and the blog is the easiest way to do it and the most reproducible.
I would say simple, but not easy. It's simple to understand, but it requires a lot of discipline. So that's the part that people struggle with, and they consider it difficult. But the concept itself is very easy, or simple, sorry, not easy. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think each personality type is kind of drawn towards their end of that triangle, or do they have to kind of make mistakes in getting to that point?
Absolutely. So we know we have some friends of ours who did the entrepreneurial route. Started up a tech company from a handful, like literally in their like garage, and then sold it for like a couple $1 million, and then made it that way. And every time we talk about like, oh, we're bottling our own wine and this kind of stuff, their eyes just kind of glaze over because it's just not interesting for them. It's just not like it's interesting for us when we kind of say, oh, hey, if we do this, then our cost of bottling wine goes from like $10 a bottle to like $2, right? So like that kind of stuff is exciting for us. But to the mindset of the person who is the entrepreneurial type, they have this attitude almost of like, it doesn't matter how much you spend, but because you can always make more.
It's go big or go home.
Go big or go home, this kind of stuff.
And then when they tell us about what they had to go through to become a millionaire, like at one point, this person was paying like the handful of staff that they had in their business, that in their startup, with their own credit card and maxing out every single personal credit card that they had in order to pay their salaries. Like just thinking about that gives me like heart palpitations. So that's not that kind of roller coaster up and down. Like one day you're on top of the world, the next day you're maxing everything you have, and then putting multiple mortgage, like getting a second mortgage on your house. That is the kind of risk that they're willing to take in order to make it. And I am not willing to take that kind of risk. Like that, I need to be able to sleep at night, and I need to not have heart palpitations. Yeah. So definitely we're almost opposites in that way. So that is proof that millionaires are definitely not all made equal, and we all have different levels of risk. And what we find is makes us happy.
But that's why if you were to go into a bookstore and you say, business books, personal finance books, and then you start to look at all the different like advice out there, you'll actually find that they all, not only are they all different, but they all conflict, right? The reason for that is that there are three basic types of way of accumulating $1 million. And they are three very different strategies. The Robert Kiyosaki method, where he would buy up a bunch of like rental properties and like flip them or like rent them out and like leverage it and like that kind of stuff. That type of strategy is very different from ours, and that's very different from like the Steve Jobs create a tech company in their basement and then grow it to $1 billion. So those three personality types are very, very different. So it's really important to figure out what type of person you are, and then kind of choose your own adventure. Pick the path that works the best for you. I would argue that ours has the advantage of being the most reproducible. If you were to buy our book and literally copy everything that we did, you will end up a millionaire, because that's just how the mathematical properties work. The fact that we did it does not mean that someone else can't do it. But for the other two branches, you kind of have to find your own path, because again, you can't just make the next Apple because Apple already exists.
Yeah, no, I feel like your method is probably the most, most common for most people. Is people are afraid to lose their hard-earned money through stocks and putting it in, right? So I think your method makes the most sense, where people are able to understand that if they let it sit and wait, that they will be able to have it in the future and have more money than what they started off with.
Yeah.
And it's just all about that patience, which I guess is a bit challenging for some people, but
yeah, the patience and the discipline, because our path, it took from start to finish was like 9 years. And from a retirement perspective, that's like light speed kind of thing, right? Because default retirement is 65, really aggressive retirement is freedom 55. Freedom 31, that's not even a thing, right? Like the financial planners go, I've never heard of this before. So that's lightning fast from our perspective. But, 9 years saving up, 100 grand each year and that kind of stuff to somebody like my friend who's the entrepreneur would just seem like, well, this is a waste of my life, right? It's like I could, like, that's just like their brains just are not wired that way to do the slow and steady or relatively slow and steady phase. They're like, I need to do this. I need to build up my company in the next 2 years and then start selling shares or start getting financing the year after that and then go to IPO and like year after that. It's just it really is a different mindset. It's also a different risk tolerance and stress tolerance and like it's a different rhythm. Like he goes like when we talk to I've been accused of this by now, but like that guy, when I talked to him, he's like he's going like 10 times faster than when I talk because his brain is going a lot faster. So he couldn't do something for like 10 years that just like he couldn't do the slow and steady thing because he would get bored.
Yeah. Well, I guess, that shows that everyone's got their own path, right? And that they just need to find it and follow it. But
yeah.
Well, I really do appreciate you guys coming on today, taking the time out of your day to discuss your book, discuss your thoughts. So thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Blurred Summits. If you guys want to watch a visual version, it's on YouTube and it will be on Spotify, Apple Music, and all other streaming platforms for you guys to listen to once a week, every Sunday. Thanks, guys, and see you guys next time.